This is Kuldrin's Krypt, episode 17 for May 22nd, 2017.
Welcome. Welcome to my dungeon.
Welcome to Kuldrin's Krypt. Today with your host, Master Kuldrin. I'm Funsize, your new co-host. If you're new to the show, this is the place to dispel myths, get rid of stereotypes, and answer your questions about BDSM. You can call in at 865-268-4005 to leave your questions, or visit the Krypt at kuldrinskrypt.com. Today we're going to be discussing moving online play to offline. As I have more experience about this, Kuldrin's decided to give me the lead today. So let's start off by talking about when the right time to move online into real life would be. Kuldrin, do you have any thoughts on this before I begin?
No, I'm just really interested to hear what all you have to say, especially after last week's conversation. So, like you said, you've got the lead. Go for it.
Today, we're going to be discussing the nuances of moving online play to offline.
Okay.
And we're going to be looking at when the right time is, how to do it, and how things will change.
That sounds like a good start to me. So when is the right time to do that then?
Well, as with most topics in BDSM, it's all about the individuals participating in it. So it is a very individual choice, and you have to figure out a few things before you can try. If you're going to be moving closer to the person as a permanent move, or if it's a vacation. Okay. And you also need to have the rest of your life line up with jobs and family and everything else, just as you would with any other move.
But is there like some kind of typical timeline that we're looking at here that people will normally do this, as far as like after they meet somebody and they have their online play, they decide to take it to that next step and have a collaring? How long before this move might take place, or does it happen before that? Or
typically it's around 6 months to a year after the official collaring for most, but it can differ because, like I said before, it's individuals that make the decisions.
Do you think that collaring itself happens quicker in an online setting or offline, or would you say it's about the same?
For me, it has been about the same. It's usually between 2 and 6 months after the initial meet for me. I would say that that's often the same trend with most that I've met, both on and offline in the community. So I would say it's about the same overall.
Now, with me, I use typically 2 collars, well, 3 collars. There's just the play collar for those fun playtime submissives that I will meet. But as far as an actual DS or MS relationship goes, I have a consideration collar that I will give, and then, of course, the full collaring, which to the vanilla world would compare to a wedding ring. So when you're talking about collaring, are you talking about like some kind of initial consideration, or actually when someone is fully collared?
I would say that it's usually, in my experience, fully collared, but a lot of people online especially don't consider the depth of the relationship that they do offline, because as you said, for you and for most out there in the offline lifestyle, it is comparable to a wedding ring. Online, it's more an exclusive dating relationship, commitment, depth, and it's a very different thing when you're looking at those two in comparison.
Okay. I got you. In regard to some of these individual circumstances, what kind of things could somebody run into there? I mean, it seems like it's common sense, but common sense isn't always that common.
Well, some of the things that you could run into is, say, your partner lives in Cincinnati and suddenly you get a job offer there. That might beat up or push you into moving things offline when you otherwise may not. Or you might have your person in Cincinnati and suddenly your job tells you to move to Portland. Well, of course, that's going to push it further back than you would have originally liked or maybe have planned.
Okay. So work, I imagine family would come into play for most people. Children,
oh, absolutely.
In cases.
Oh, yes. There are several people out there that have children, and of course they put their children's needs before their own.
Or they should anyway.
Should, yes.
So doing the switch the right way, I guess, what would that look like? Meeting them first? I would imagine that if you're thinking about moving in with somebody or reliving relocating to be closer to them, maybe not even moving in with them right away, but what would that look like?
Well, I would treat it, and I have always treated it as the first time I'm meeting anyone else in BDSM. Yes, there may be a connection pre-formed, and yes, there is trust there, but you still need to put your safety first. Figure out where to meet. Still meet somewhere publicly, because things may not be offline and in the real world what they seemed like online. So you still have to avoid any predators or catfish, and you still have to put safety first. And
whoa, sorry. Catfish?
Go ahead.
Now, I know there's a TV show, I think it's MTV or VH1, one of those, that has a show called Catfish. I'm 40 years old. I've already admitted that I don't do a lot of online stuff. I've heard the term before, but what is a catfish? I mean, I grew up next to a big lake. I loved fishing. But so that's what I know about. What are you referring to as online catfishing?
Well, in the case of BDSM especially, it would be someone that says, oh, I'm a 40-year-old dom that likes spanking. Turns out he's actually a 300-pound 18-year-old living in his parents' basement that has never picked up a paddle or a belt even. So, it's people that are pretending to be something they're not.
Okay. Yeah, I know for a fact that happens a lot online, but I actually honestly did not realize that term was what that was. Okay, so anyway, back to doing this whole move from online to offline the right way. How do you determine where to meet? Do you set up, I would imagine, because I am, safety first, setting up protocols and things when you have this, I would assume, an initial meet before you make this move, things of this nature. What can you talk about there?
I would say that you definitely want to have your emergency protocols in place. Have a safe place you can go in case things go wrong, or have people that you check in with regularly. Have people that call you. Some people go, oh, texting, but the truth of the matter is anyone can pick up your phone and text anyone else. So personally, I prefer the calling because no one can mimic your voice or what you're going to say or your idiosyncrasies. You want to make sure you're not going to be isolated with the person. They might say, oh, I have a cabin out in Montana. Come up and see me out in the mountains. Well, you're out in the middle of nowhere. You're isolated. You don't actually know what that person's going to do to you in real life. They might be well and great online, but you don't know until you are face to face. So, you want to use basic first meeting practices that you would with anyone. And you want to make sure that your safety and their safety is your number one priority above everything else.
Absolutely. I think that's a good point that a lot of people don't understand, especially the younger people, because they still have that mindset of, well, this won't happen to me, even though the person that they just saw murdered on the news by some crazed psychopath probably said the exact same thing the morning that they woke up. Hey, this won't happen to me. It'll happen to somebody else, but not me. So it is such a strong point with me, and that's exactly why. So this move, you meet them, things are going well. As with any relationship, things are going to evolve, things are going to change. And I know for a fact, looking at my own life and other couples that I know have gone through some pretty hard times making that adjustment, whether it was a real life relationship, online relationship, whatever, to actually becoming an in-person, in real life relationship and living together. So are there any specific warnings or things to look out for as far as that goes? Is there anything different that may change between moving online to real life as opposed to if the relationship just started in real life?
Well, there's some things that are definitely going to change. A lot of things are going to change. For one thing, you're going to have to start out with a new negotiation because, as we discussed when we did our online play podcast last week, things need to be negotiated different online from offline. And as you make the change, you're going to have to negotiate them all over again because you will have different limits and expectations that need to be discussed and gone over and agreed to or pushed aside.
Well, that makes sense. I would imagine that as with real life relationships, DS relationships, online, there's going to be training that a dominant will have the submissive do of some extent. And I would think that when you move to real life situation that you're really going to have to completely redo that to some extent? I don't know.
Absolutely. You know, you have to expect a training period because the situation has changed so much. And just like when you go with any new dominant or submissive or whatever, there's got to be a short training period so that you can adjust to each other. And that happens when you move online to offline. The same way. You go through the same training period for a short while, and then you're back and you're golden, and your bond's usually deeper and better for it.
You know, on that note, I'll say something that a lot of dominants will not admit to, which makes me question their intention in their own personal education. But dominants also go through a training period because everybody thinks it's just the submissive. But as a dominant, we are training ourselves and learning our submissive, because if you treat every submissive the same way, then, you know, you're doing it completely wrong. So we have to also train ourselves. And I've had submissives that have kind of trained me in some ways, and it wasn't even topping from the bottom. I wish I could give an example of that, but I think that's something that doms listening to this may need to consider as well. That it's okay to admit that. As a switch and someone who is greedy and runs on both sides of the fence there, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say you're definitely right. I think there's a certain versatility required with whoever you encounter, where you have to retrain and readjust to their needs and try to align them with your own for the best experience.
Fair enough. So you go from online, you're in real life, real relationships where you're around each other all the time are completely different. I mean, I do have some online business associates and friends, I guess you could call them, you know, people all around the world that I do business with. So I can kind of compare that in a way that most of these people I really enjoy talking to. It's a lot of fun. But then once I'm offline, I may be conducting business around that conversation that we had, but I'm no longer around them to become bored with them, I guess would be the way to say it. So in this type of move, is that something that people, I would imagine, just there again, common sense would dictate that you really need to be prepared for that, because it seems like, you know, once you start around somebody all the time, I always say you never know somebody until you've lived with them. So you may become annoyed or depressed.
That's definitely true. Like you said, you're around them all the time. You might find that they maybe squeeze the toothpaste from the top and it really bothers you.
Yes, it does. And, how did you know that?
It's little things like that can get to you. And it's day-to-day stuff that you don't really think about necessarily in the BDSM world because they seem so vanilla that you might go, oh, I'm above that. But the truth is none of us are. We're still people. We still have to live, you know. And, you know, it can be very boring and annoying and even depressing when you move from online where the only thing you see is your idealistic view of a partnership. And when you move offline, there's little things like that where suddenly you have to deal with them. You just have to be honest about it. Be realistic.
Okay, so on being realistic there, I guess another thing is the realistic expectations. Online and offline, I would imagine, is going to have two totally different sets of limits and kinks. You're going to be more extreme because you're going to let your imagination and your fantasies completely go when you're online. So in your experience, how has that communication process taken place? I would assume before you would make a move or before you would meet somebody, you would say, hey, you know that thing that we did where you choked me until I passed out when we were playing online? Yeah, that's actually a hard limit in real life. I mean, like I said, I would assume that would take place before you actually met them in real life, but how do you work that?
One would hope that would happen before you met them in real life. It works pretty much just like you explained it. You would have to go, okay, so we did this online, but in real life, that can't be done. That's not okay. That's a safety issue, or I'm not comfortable with it. You have to be able to honestly communicate your limits and your needs. You could find that the person online just isn't into spanking because it's not the real thing. You could then move offline and go, hey, so you know how you didn't like to do that online because you couldn't actually feel my ass smacked? Mm-hmm. Well, now you can do it.
Sounds just like with any relationship. Communication and being informed. And that's why I know in the standard set it's SSC. I always add the informed there because you really need that informed consent. So that would seem like that's a major part of making sure that this new experience is a positive one. But what other kinds of things do you need to do to make the most of it?
You need to communicate about everything. Even if it's something stupid like you like to have spaghetti on Tuesdays, communicate. Be honest about everything. And then make sure that you have your own space. And this is important in any relationship. If you don't have your own space or your own area of life where everything is taken over by the other person, it's not going to go very well for you or them because you will get frustrated. Every single person needs their own space. And this is still true regardless of your role in the BDSM lifestyle.
So I was right then. It does seem to fit just like a normal relationship with communication, getting everything set in place, being realistic, and having your own space, which is something that I really didn't even think of, including in that negotiation before the move. Is there anything else that you would like to add to that?
I would say just to enjoy every moment and be prepared for the changes that are ahead of you.
Very good. What if it doesn't work? I mean, what are you going to do?
You also have to be prepared for that. You may find that your relationship with this person may work better online than offline, or it may come down to you just can't make it work at all. And you always have to keep that in your mind that things that seem like forever may change in the future. And you just have to be able to kind of roll with the punches on that one.
So there again, open communication and being honest about things, having a truly adult relationship and not getting hung up on, well, I don't want to hurt their feelings because that's just going to build resentment.
Well, yes. And you always, I've yet to see it go any other way. You always end up hurting the person more when you aren't honest and you don't communicate than when you do. I mean, it may hurt kind of like a Band-Aid getting ripped off the first time for a little while, but overall the pain is going to be a lot less for both parties.
I absolutely agree. In fact, I've recently gone through that where someone was not completely open and honest about things and decided that their way of ending things was just a ghost. So completely not following the guidelines that were set up in the relationship as far as communication goes. Are there any other afterthoughts?
No, I think we've covered a good portion of it. And then if our listeners have any questions, they can, of course, contact us at the Krypt.
And what is that email address for you?
It is funsize@kuldrinscrypt.com.
And mine is sir@kuldrinscrypt.com. And that is going to wrap us up. Of course, you can find all this information in the show notes at kuldrinscrypt.com/show notes. Funsize, thanks again for joining me and the listeners here at the Krypt. It is a pleasure to have you on as as my co-host, and I look forward to all the information that we collaborate on in the future.
Same here.
Hey, Master Kuldrin here. If you're having trouble putting together a contract for your DS or MS relationship, or if you just want something nicer, say in soft or hardbound, check out BDSMcontracts.org. I've used them in the past, and I will continue to use them in the future. Use the coupon code Kuldrin20 for a 20% discount off of all purchases. That's BDSMcontracts.org. And now those rules to love by. Rule number 1, safe, sane, consensual, and informed. Rule number 2, Kinky, KNKI, from the Kinky app available on all platforms. That stands for knowledge, no intolerance, kindness, and integrity. And the quote from Mr. Paul Young, submission is not about authority and it's not about obedience. It is all about relationships of love and respect. Next week on the Krypt, Funsize is going to continue educating us about modern BDSM practices by discussing the ins and outs of taking that online relationship to a real-world setting. In the meantime, visit kuldrinscrypt.com to sign up for our mailing list, to get subscribed to the podcast, and also help support the show through Patreon. This has been Master Kuldrin and Funsize for kuldrinscrypt.com. Unearth the truth.